There comes a moment in every survivor's journey when the balance of power quietly shifts. It is not marked by an argument, a dramatic goodbye, or a final confrontation. It happens internally. It is the moment you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. The moment you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. The moment you no longer seek validation from the person who repeatedly withheld it. This is the moment a narcissist fears more than anything. Not because they suddenly discover love, not because they become deeply remorseful, but because they realize something they believed would never happen. You are no longer emotionally available to control. For a narcissist, people often become sources of validation, admiration, attention, or emotional supply. When that supply disappears permanently, they may react in ways that seem confusing, dramatic, or even surprisingly emotional. These reactions can look like love, regret, or transformation, but they are often responses to losing influence rather than genuine emotional growth. Dr. Ramani repeatedly emphasizes that healing begins when you stop analyzing the narcissist's every move and start investing your energy in your own recovery. Understanding their patterns is valuable, but only if that knowledge sets you free rather than keeping you emotionally tied to them. Today, we'll explore 3 powerful keynotes that reveal what often happens when a narcissist realizes they've truly lost control, and more importantly, how recognizing these patterns helps you protect your peace and move forward. There is a profound difference between someone missing you and someone missing the control they once had over you. At first glance, those two things can look almost identical. Both may involve unexpected phone calls, emotional messages, apologies, or attempts to reconnect. But underneath the surface, the motivation can be very different. One of the most difficult parts of healing after a narcissistic relationship is learning to separate appearances from patterns. A single kind gesture can feel convincing. A heartfelt message can awaken hope. A promise to change can stir memories of the person you believed they could become. Yet true change is not measured by a moment of emotion. It is measured by consistent behavior over time. Many people spend years believing that if they just loved harder, explained themselves more clearly, forgave one more betrayal, or became more patient, the relationship would finally become healthy. But healthy relationships are not built on endless sacrifice from one person while the other refuses accountability. Dr. Ramani often emphasizes that narcissistic dynamics revolve around power, validation, and emotional influence. This does not mean every action is consciously planned, nor does it mean every person with narcissistic traits behaves identically. But many survivors recognize a common pattern. When the other person begins to regain independence, the dynamic often shifts. Think about your journey. There was probably a time when your entire day depended on their mood. If they were happy, you felt relief. If they were angry, your stomach tightened. If they ignored you, you questioned your worth. If they praised you, you felt temporarily safe. Without realizing it, your emotional life may have become tied to reactions you could never fully predict. That is exhausting. No one is meant to live constantly scanning another person's emotions just to feel secure. Real love should expand your life. Control slowly shrinks it. Little by little, you stop speaking freely because you're afraid of conflict. You stop wearing certain clothes because they'll criticize you. You stop seeing certain friends because it creates arguments. You stop celebrating your successes because they somehow become offended or dismissive. Eventually, you begin disappearing without even noticing. The tragedy isn't only that someone mistreated you. The tragedy is that you slowly forgot who you were before the relationship taught you to doubt yourself. Then something begins to change, not overnight. Healing rarely arrives like lightning. It arrives quietly. One morning you wake up and realize you didn't check your phone first. A week later, you notice you laughed without guilt. Months later, you make a decision without wondering how they would react. These moments seem small, but they are revolutionary, because every healthy decision weakens the emotional chains that once kept you trapped. And this is often when the narcissist notices something different. They notice your silence, not the silence of punishment, the silence of peace. There is a tremendous difference. When people are trying to manipulate someone, silence is often used as a weapon. But when survivors heal, silence becomes something entirely different. It becomes freedom. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself. You no longer need to defend every decision. You no longer spend hours crafting the perfect response. Your nervous system begins learning something it may have forgotten long ago: safety. That is what healing feels like. It feels unfamiliar at first because chaos once became your normal. Many survivors describe feeling almost uncomfortable when life becomes peaceful, without arguments, without emotional highs and lows, without constant unpredictability. The quiet can seem strange. But that quiet is not emptiness. It is stability. It is your mind recovering from years of emotional overload. As your healing grows stronger, something remarkable begins happening. You stop reacting automatically. When someone criticizes you unfairly, you pause. When someone tries to provoke guilt, you notice it. When someone attempts to manipulate your emotions, you recognize the pattern instead of getting pulled into it. Awareness becomes your greatest protection. Not because you become suspicious of everyone, but because you finally trust yourself. That trust is something many survivors lost during narcissistic relationships. They were repeatedly told their feelings were wrong. Their memories were questioned. Their experiences were minimized. Their reality was challenged until they doubted their own judgment. Healing means reclaiming that inner voice. You begin saying, "I know what I experienced. I don't need someone else's permission to trust my instincts. My feelings matter. My boundaries matter. My peace matters." Those statements are not selfish. They are healthy. For someone accustomed to influencing your emotions, these changes can feel confusing. They may test whether old patterns still work. They may reach out in familiar ways, revisit shared memories, or behave as though the past can simply be erased. What matters most is not trying to interpret every action they take. It is noticing how you respond. If you find yourself pulled back into anxiety, pause. Ask yourself, am I responding from hope or from fear? Am I returning because I believe things have genuinely changed or because this pattern feels familiar? These questions help shift your attention from their behavior to your own well-being. One of the greatest lessons you'll ever learn is this: you do not owe endless access to someone simply because they ask for it. You do not owe another chance simply because someone fears losing you. You do not owe your peace to anyone who repeatedly disturbed it. Healthy relationships respect boundaries. They do not argue against them. As you continue healing, your confidence grows in quiet ways. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop needing to convince people who refuse to understand. You stop chasing closure from someone unwilling to take responsibility. Instead, you begin creating closure through your own choices. Every day you honor your boundaries. You become stronger. Every day you protect your peace. You become clearer. Every day you choose self-respect over emotional chaos. You reclaim another part of yourself. One day you'll look back and realize something extraordinary. The person who once had so much influence over your emotions no longer controls your thoughts. Not because they changed, because you did. You learned that your value was never dependent on someone else's approval. You learned that real love never asks you to abandon yourself. You learned that walking away from what repeatedly harms you is not failure, it is courage. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this: the moment you stop trying to control how they see you is the moment you truly become free. That freedom is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is the quiet confidence of waking each morning knowing that your peace no longer depends on another person's choices. And once you experience that kind of freedom, you will never again confuse control with love. One of the most confusing parts of recovering from a narcissistic relationship is not always what happened during the relationship. It is what happens after you leave. Many survivors expect the story to end the day they walk away. They imagine that distance will immediately bring clarity, peace, and emotional freedom. But often, the chapter after the relationship is the one that leaves them asking the most questions. Why are they suddenly being kind? Why are they apologizing now? Why do they seem heartbroken after acting so cold? Why are they acting like the victim? Why do they tell other people a completely different story? These questions can consume your thoughts because the behavior appears inconsistent. One moment they seem gentle and remorseful, the next moment they are angry, dismissive, or trying to damage your reputation. Then, without warning, they may return with warmth, nostalgia, or promises that this time everything will be different. This emotional whiplash is deeply disorienting. Dr. Ramani often explains that inconsistency itself can become part of an unhealthy relational pattern. It keeps people emotionally engaged because they are constantly trying to predict what version of the other person will appear next. Think about how exhausting that is. Imagine driving down a road where every traffic light changes color without warning. You would never relax. Every second would require intense attention because you could never trust what came next. Many survivors lived like that emotionally. They never knew whether they would receive affection or criticism, whether they would be praised or blamed, whether they would experience connection or rejection. Living inside uncertainty eventually trains your nervous system to remain on high alert. You stop feeling safe. Instead, you become hyper-aware. You analyze every text message, every facial expression, every pause in conversation, every slight change in tone. You become an expert at reading emotional danger because survival seemed to depend on it. But here's the painful truth. No amount of analysis can create stability where stability does not exist. Many survivors believe that if they can simply understand the narcissist well enough, they will finally know how to make the relationship work. But healthy relationships are not puzzles you must solve. They are partnerships built on trust, consistency, respect, and accountability. When those foundations are missing, no amount of effort from one person can compensate. After separation, many survivors experience another emotional trap. The narcissist suddenly appears transformed. Perhaps they become unusually thoughtful. Perhaps they begin saying everything you wanted to hear for years. Perhaps they admit mistakes they once denied. Perhaps they promise therapy. Perhaps they promise change. Perhaps they finally acknowledge your pain. At first, this feels like hope. You think, this is the person I knew was always inside them. This is the version I waited for. This is why I stayed. But hope without evidence can become another prison. Real transformation is never measured by emotional speeches. It is measured by consistent actions over long periods of time. Anyone can make promises during moments of crisis. Character is revealed by what someone consistently does after the crisis has passed. Dr. Ramani repeatedly reminds survivors that accountability is more than saying, "I'm sorry." Accountability means accepting responsibility without excuses. It means respecting boundaries even when those boundaries are painful. It means allowing another person to heal without demanding immediate forgiveness. It means recognizing the impact of one's behavior rather than focusing only on personal discomfort. Without these deeper changes, apologies alone cannot rebuild trust. Many narcissistic individuals also struggle intensely with protecting their self-image. If they cannot regain the relationship, they may try to protect their ego in other ways. Some may minimize the relationship. Some may rewrite history. Some may portray themselves as misunderstood. Others may seek validation elsewhere very quickly. These responses are not always about you. Often they are attempts to manage feelings of shame, rejection, or loss of control without confronting painful truths about themselves. That distinction matters, because survivors frequently personalize everything. If they're dating someone else already, maybe I never mattered. If they're smiling online, maybe I imagined the abuse. If they're telling people I'm the problem, maybe I really was. These thoughts are understandable after prolonged manipulation, but they are not reliable indicators of reality. Your worth has never depended on another person's public image. Your healing is not measured by whether they admit what happened. Healing begins when you stop asking them to confirm your reality. You already lived it. You already know what happened. You no longer need permission to believe your own experience. That realization changes everything. Instead of constantly monitoring their behavior, you begin monitoring your own peace. Instead of asking, what are they thinking? You begin asking, how am I feeling today? Instead of wondering, will they finally understand me? You begin asking, what relationships help me feel emotionally safe? Notice how different those questions are. One keeps your attention trapped in their world. The other brings your attention back to your own life. That is where healing begins. Another powerful shift happens when you stop confusing intensity with intimacy. Many narcissistic relationships are filled with emotional extremes, extraordinary affection followed by devastating criticism, grand promises followed by deep disappointment, moments of intense closeness followed by emotional distance. The nervous system can become addicted to this unpredictability. The emotional highs feel extraordinary because they follow painful lows. But healthy love rarely feels like a roller coaster. Healthy love feels dependable. It feels peaceful. It feels respectful. It allows disagreement without humiliation. It allows honesty without punishment. It allows vulnerability without fear. Many survivors initially mistake this stability for boredom because chaos became familiar. But peace is not boring. Peace is what allows you to become yourself again. You begin laughing naturally. You begin sleeping better. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop checking your phone with anxiety. You stop wondering whether today will be another emotional battle. Your body begins believing what your mind is slowly learning. You are finally safe, and safety changes everything. Your confidence returns, your creativity returns, your sense of humor returns, your ability to trust wisely, not blindly, returns. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: not everyone who comes back deserves another chance. Sometimes people return because they genuinely want to repair what was broken. Other times they return because they miss access, familiarity, or control. You cannot always know another person's motivation immediately, but you can observe their consistency. Time reveals what emotions often hide. That is why patience becomes one of your greatest allies. Do not let urgency make decisions that wisdom should make. If someone has truly changed, they will respect your need for distance. They will understand that trust cannot be demanded, it must be earned. And if they become angry because you require time, boundaries, or accountability, that reaction itself provides valuable information. Healthy people understand that healing takes time. They do not pressure you to ignore your own emotional safety for their comfort. As you continue growing, you realize something extraordinary. Your greatest strength is no longer your ability to forgive endlessly. It is your ability to recognize patterns clearly. You no longer chase potential. You pay attention to behavior. You no longer confuse promises with progress. You look for consistency. You no longer abandon yourself trying to rescue someone else. You choose relationships where love and respect exist together. Because the greatest transformation is not that the narcissist changes. The greatest transformation is that you do. You become someone who no longer mistakes emotional chaos for passion. You become someone who trusts actions more than words. You become someone who knows that protecting your peace is not selfish. It is one of the highest forms of self-respect. And once that wisdom becomes part of who you are, you stop fearing whether the narcissist will return. Because you finally understand something far more important. You are no longer the person they once had power over. There comes a day in every survivor's journey that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but internally, it changes everything. There are no fireworks, no grand announcement, no final confrontation, no perfect apology. Instead, there is a quiet realization. You wake up one morning and notice that they are no longer the first thought in your mind. That moment is powerful. Not because you've forgotten what happened, not because the pain magically disappeared, but because your life is finally becoming bigger than your wounds. For so long, your emotional world may have revolved around one question. What are they going to do next? Will they call? Will they apologize? Will they come back? Will they finally understand? Will they admit the truth? Those questions can consume years of a person's life. Dr. Ramani often reminds survivors that one of the deepest injuries left by narcissistic relationships is that your attention becomes permanently focused on someone else's behavior. Instead of asking yourself what you need, you become an expert at predicting another person's moods, reactions, and intentions. You become emotionally exhausted, not because you are weak, but because you have been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry. Think about how much energy you spent trying to understand someone who refused to understand themselves. How many nights did you replay conversations? How many mornings did you wake up hoping today would be different? How many times did you blame yourself for problems you didn't create? How often did you apologize just to keep the peace? How many pieces of yourself did you quietly sacrifice because you believed love required endless endurance? These are painful questions, but they also reveal something extraordinary. If you had enough strength to survive that season, imagine what you can build now that your energy belongs to you again. Healing begins the moment your attention changes direction. Instead of looking backward, you begin looking inward. Instead of asking why they behaved the way they did, you begin asking what kind of life you want to create. Instead of trying to rescue someone else, you finally begin rescuing yourself. That is where real freedom begins. Many survivors think freedom means never thinking about the narcissist again. But freedom is much deeper than that. Freedom means they no longer control your emotional weather. Their success no longer determines your self-worth. Their opinions no longer define your identity. Their silence no longer creates anxiety. Their approval no longer feels necessary. Their rejection no longer feels like proof that you are unlovable. You finally realize something that was always true. Your value never came from them. It never depended on their compliments. It never disappeared because they criticized you. It never changed because they ignored you. It was always yours. They simply convinced you to forget it. And now, you are remembering. Little by little, you begin meeting yourself again. You rediscover the hobbies you abandoned. You reconnect with friends you slowly drifted away from. You laugh without checking whether someone is offended. You make decisions without asking for permission. You wear what you love. You speak your truth. You stop shrinking yourself to make someone else comfortable. This is not rebellion. This is restoration. You are becoming the person you were always meant to be before fear became your daily companion. One of the most beautiful parts of healing is learning to trust yourself again. During unhealthy relationships, many survivors lose confidence in their own instincts. They begin questioning everything. Am I too sensitive? Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm asking for too much. Over time, self-doubt becomes automatic, but healing slowly rewrites that inner dialogue. Instead of questioning every feeling, you begin honoring it. Instead of dismissing your intuition, you begin listening to it. Instead of ignoring red flags, you begin respecting them. Your inner voice grows stronger every single day. That voice becomes your greatest guide, because your intuition was never truly broken. It was simply buried beneath confusion, fear, and manipulation. As clarity returns, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing closure from the person who hurt you. This is one of the hardest lessons to accept. Many people believe closure comes through one final conversation, one sincere apology, one honest explanation, one moment where everything finally makes sense. But life doesn't always offer those moments. Sometimes the people who hurt you never fully understand the damage they caused. Sometimes they never admit it. Sometimes they continue blaming everyone except themselves. If your healing depends on their accountability, your freedom remains in their hands. But the moment you decide, I no longer need them to validate my experience, everything changes. You become your own witness. You stop arguing with people determined to misunderstand you. You stop proving your pain to those committed to denying it. You stop waiting for justice to arrive through another person's confession. Instead, you create justice through the way you choose to live. You choose peace. You choose healthy relationships. You choose boundaries. You choose honesty. You choose yourself. That choice is more powerful than any apology they could ever offer. Another sign of true healing is that your compassion becomes wiser. Many survivors are deeply empathetic people. That empathy is beautiful. But without boundaries, empathy can become self-destruction. You begin excusing behavior that should never have been tolerated. You tell yourself they had a difficult childhood. You tell yourself they're under stress. You tell yourself they'll change. You tell yourself they don't really mean what they say. Eventually, compassion for them replaces compassion for yourself. Healing restores balance. You can understand that someone has pain without allowing them to pass that pain on to you. You can wish someone healing without returning to a relationship that repeatedly harmed you. You can forgive without forgetting. You can move forward without carrying bitterness. These are signs of emotional maturity. Not because you've become cold, but because you've learned that love without boundaries is not healthy love. As your confidence grows, your standards begin to change. You stop being impressed by grand gestures. You begin appreciating consistency. You stop chasing intensity. You begin valuing stability. You stop confusing jealousy with devotion. You recognize that trust is stronger than possession. You stop believing that emotional chaos is proof of passion. You discover that real love feels safe, it feels calm, it feels respectful. It allows both people to grow instead of one person constantly sacrificing. That realization changes every future relationship. Perhaps the narcissist notices these changes. Perhaps they see that you are no longer reacting to old tactics. Perhaps they realize you are smiling again. Perhaps they recognize that you no longer seek their approval. They may even attempt to re-enter your life because your independence challenges the role they once held. But here is the beautiful truth. Their realization is no longer the center of your story. For years, your life revolved around what they thought, what they wanted, what they needed, and what they felt. Now your life revolves around something far more meaningful: your purpose, your peace, your growth, your healing, your future. That is what emotional freedom looks like. One day, someone may ask about them, and instead of feeling anger, instead of feeling longing, instead of feeling overwhelming sadness, you simply tell the truth. They were part of my life. They taught me important lessons, but they no longer define who I am. That sentence represents years of healing, because your identity is no longer built around surviving someone else's behavior. It is built around becoming the person you were always capable of becoming. Never forget this: the greatest revenge is not making them regret losing you. The greatest revenge is living so fully that their absence no longer feels like a wound. The greatest victory is not proving your worth to someone who refused to see it. The greatest victory is finally seeing your own worth so clearly that you never again hand it over to another person's approval. And when that day comes, you will understand something that once seemed impossible. You were never healing just to recover from the past. You were healing to create a future where peace feels familiar, where respect is normal, where love is healthy, and where your heart is no longer held hostage by someone else's choices. That is true freedom. And once you experience that freedom, you realize the most important truth of all: the person who truly won was never the one who had the last word. The person who truly won was the one who found themselves again.